Well, hello there, fellow adventurers, and welcome back to our little corner of the world, our rolling home we affectionately call Serenity. If you're new here, I'm Mark, and this is my incredible wife, Karen. We're a couple of 50-somethings who decided that the tick-tock of a predictable life wasn't quite hitting the right notes anymore. So, we traded in the bricks and mortar for wheels and wonder, and honestly, most days, it's the best decision we ever made. Ever wonder if it's too late to chase a big dream, to just up and change everything? Let me tell you, it's not. But it's not always sunshine and perfectly filtered Instagram photos either. Today's story is about one of those times when Mother Nature decided to remind us exactly who's in charge. We found ourselves perched on what felt like the top of the world, a high alpine meadow in the Italian Dolomites, a place so beautiful it almost hurt your eyes. The morning had dawned crisp and impossibly clear. I remember standing outside Serenity, coffee cup warming my hands, the air thin and tasting of pine and distant snow. Karen was already up, a little silhouette against the rising sun, doing her morning stretches. "Can you believe this, Mark?" she called out, her voice full of that quiet awe we've come to cherish. "It's like we've got the whole planet to ourselves." I nodded, taking a deep gulp of the coffee. It's moments like these, isn't it? This is what it's all about. The plan for the day was simple, a leisurely hike along a ridge that promised even more spectacular views, a packed lunch, and back to Serenity before dusk. Easy. Famous last words in the world of van life, as you seasoned travelers will know. There's a certain complacency that can creep in when you've had a string of perfect days, a feeling that the universe is just going to keep on smiling. That, my friends, is usually when the universe decides to show its full range of expressions. The early part of the day unfolded just as beautifully as we'd hoped. We packed our small rucksacks, filled water bottles, and locked up Serenity, feeling that familiar thrill of anticipation. The air was still, the sun warm on our faces, and the wildflowers were just incredible, little bursts of color everywhere we looked. We talked about everything and nothing, the way you do when you've been married for over 30 years and still find new things to discover in each other's company, especially when set against such a grand backdrop. We even mused about how our old life, with its commutes and schedules, felt like a distant dream, almost like it happened to someone else. The freedom we felt was palpable, a living thing that surrounded us. "Think we'll see any marmots today?" Karen asked, shading her eyes as she scanned a rocky outcrop. "Hope so," I replied. "They're probably all hiding, thinking, 'Here come those noisy humans again,'" we laughed. It was all very idyllic. Too idyllic, perhaps. There's a saying, isn't there? If something seems too good to be true. It was around midday, as we were enjoying our sandwiches with a view that could have graced any postcard, that Karen first pointed it out. "Mark, look at those clouds over there, towards the west. They weren't there an hour ago, were they?" I followed her gaze. Sure enough, a line of dark, bruised-looking clouds was massing on the horizon, looking starkly out of place against the otherwise brilliant blue. I, in my infinite wisdom, or perhaps just wishful thinking, waved a dismissive hand. "Ah, they're miles away. Probably just a bit of weather blowing over the next valley. We'll be fine." Karen, who generally has a much better instinct for these things, frowned. "I don't know, Mark. They look like they're moving pretty fast. And the air, it feels different, doesn't it? Heavier." She was right, of course. That light, crisp morning feel had subtly shifted. A certain stillness had fallen, the kind that often precedes a dramatic change. The birdsong had quieted. Even the insects seemed to have gone into hiding. A little shiver, not entirely from cold, ran down my spine. That's the thing about being out in the wild, truly out in it, you become more attuned to these subtle shifts, these whispers from the environment. Your senses, dulled by years of office lighting and central heating, start to wake up. "Maybe you're right," I conceded, already starting to pack away the remnants of our lunch. "Perhaps we should start heading back." Better safe than sorry, understatement of the year, as it turned out. The walk back to Serenity took on a new urgency. What had been a leisurely stroll became a purposeful stride. The clouds, those ominous dark masses, were no longer distant. They were visibly rolling towards us, swallowing the blue sky with an alarming speed. The wind, which had been a gentle caress earlier, now began to whip around us in unpredictable gusts, carrying the scent of rain and something else, something wilder. "Okay, definitely time to go," Karen said, her voice a little tight. She's not one to panic, but I could see the concern etched on her face. And when Karen's concerned, I know it's time to take things seriously. We almost jogged the last half-kilometer, the changing light casting an eerie, yellowish glow over the landscape. The majestic peaks that had looked so benign just hours before now seemed to glower down at us, ancient and indifferent to our tiny human plight. Reaching Serenity felt like reaching a sanctuary, but we knew we weren't safe yet. "Right," I said, trying to sound more in control than I felt. "Operation Batten down the hatches. You get the chairs and the outside mat, I'll check the solar panel and the vents." We worked quickly, a well-oiled team born of years of practice, though usually our battening down involved preparing for a bumpy road, not an alpine tempest. The camp chairs were folded and stowed in a breath. The small outdoor mat, which usually welcomed us home, was whisked inside. I clambered onto the little ladder at the back to double-check that our flexible solar panel was securely fastened. The thought of that ripping off in high wind was not a pleasant one. Karen was inside, making sure all the roof vents were closed and latched, and that anything loose was secured. You learn very quickly in a van that anything not tied down becomes a projectile on a rough road, or, as we were about to discover, in a severe storm. The first fat raindrops began to splat against the windscreen just as I slammed the driver's door shut. They were heavy, cold, and a stark warning. Then, the wind hit. It wasn't a gust, it was a solid wall of air that slammed into Serenity with a force that made her shudder. "Whoa," Karen breathed, gripping the edge of the small counter. "That's more than I expected." The rain intensified instantly, from splats to a deafening roar on the roof and sides. It was like being inside a drum during a particularly enthusiastic solo. Visibility dropped to near zero. The beautiful alpine meadow we'd been admiring was now just a swirling gray chaos beyond the windows. And then came the hail. Small stones at first, pinging off the metalwork, then larger ones, cracking against the windscreen with alarming force. Each impact was like a gunshot. "Are the windows going to hold?" Karen asked, her voice barely audible above the din. "They should," I yelled back, though a knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. "They're toughened glass." Supposed to be, anyway. We'd never tested them against this kind of onslaught. Serenity, our trusty home, was rocking violently now, side to side, as if a giant hand was shaking her. It was a deeply unsettling feeling, being tossed around in your own living room. I remembered the pop-top roof. The pop-top. The latches. I scrambled towards the front. We always double-check them, but in this kind of wind, if those failed, the roof canvas would be shredded in seconds, and we'd be exposed to the full fury of the storm. I pushed against the internal mechanism, trying to add my own strength to the factory latches. Karen was right beside me, doing the same on her side. Teamwork, even in fear. Or perhaps, especially in fear. "Hold on!" I shouted, more to myself than to her. The noise was incredible, the wind howling like a banshee, the relentless drumming of hail and rain, the creaks and groans of Serenity's bodywork as she flexed under the strain. It's funny, the things that go through your mind. I found myself thinking about the insurance policy. Did it cover acts of God on a remote Italian mountainside? Probably not. "Mark, look." Karen pointed towards the side window, her face pale. A stream of water was trickling in from the top of the window sill. Not a torrent, but definitely more than a drip. "Okay, towels." I yelled. Emergency leak protocol. Another one of our unspoken van life systems. We always keep a stack of old towels handy for just such occasions, though usually, it's for a spilled coffee or a minor plumbing issue, not a full-blown weather assault. Karen grabbed a couple and started pressing them against the offending seal. It was a small battle against a much larger force, but it felt important to do something, to not just sit there and be pummeled. The van gave a particularly violent lurch and a cupboard door flew open, spilling a cascade of pasta packets onto the floor. "Leave it," I said. "Pasta can wait." There was a strange sort of detached humor starting to bubble up amidst the fear. What else could you do but laugh, just a little, at the sheer absurdity of it all? Here we were, in our 50s, supposedly sensible people, being thrown around in a metal box on a mountaintop. This wasn't in the glossy travel brochures. "I think," Karen said, her voice strained as she pressed harder against the leaking window, "this might be the most extreme weather we've ever camped in. Remember that wind in Patagonia? This makes Patagonia feel like a gentle breeze." I retorted. And it was true. We'd faced strong winds before, driving rain, even a bit of snow, but this combination of wind, torrential rain, and aggressive hail was a new level of intensity. It felt personal, somehow, as if the storm had singled us out. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The assault was relentless. We could hear branches cracking outside, the wind shrieking through unseen crevices. Every now and then, a larger hailstone would hit with a particularly vicious thud, making us both jump. We exchanged worried glances. There's a point where your preparations meet their limit, and you're just in the hands of fate, or in this case, the structural integrity of a German-engineered campervan. "Is she going to tip?" Karen asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been lurking in my own mind. We were broadside to the main force of the wind. No, she's heavy," I said, trying to reassure us both. "Low center of gravity. Designed for this, well, maybe not this exactly, but she's tough." I hoped I sounded more convincing than I felt. I patted the dashboard, as if serenity were a nervous mare needing a calming touch. "Good girl, hold steady." Then, as suddenly as it began, the intensity started to lessen. The hail softened to just rain, the drumming on the roof became less frantic. The wind, though still strong, lost some of its furious edge. It didn't stop all at once, more like a slow, grudging retreat. The roaring faded to a howl, then to a whistle, and finally, to a sigh. A profound silence descended, broken only by the dripping of water from the trees and the continued, albeit much gentler, patter of rain on the roof. It was an almost deafening quiet after the preceding chaos. We looked at each other, still braced, still tense. "Is it over?" Karen whispered. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for the last 20 minutes, or was it an hour? Time had lost all meaning. "I think so. Or at least, the worst of it." Cautiously, I peered through the windscreen. The world outside was transformed. The vibrant meadow was flattened, sodden, and strewn with small branches and leaves. Puddles the size of small ponds had formed. The air was washed clean, though, and a strange, ethereal light was beginning to break through the retreating clouds in the west. "Wow," Karen said, her voice still a little shaky. "Just, wow." We sat there for a few moments, just processing. The adrenaline was slowly ebbing away, leaving a kind of shaky exhaustion in its wake. My hands were still clenched. I consciously uncurled them. "Right," I said, trying for a normal tone. "Damage assessment." We opened the door slowly, half expecting another gust to rip it from its hinges, but the wind was now just a moderate breeze. Stepping outside was like stepping into a different world. The temperature had plummeted. The ground was littered with hailstones, some surprisingly large, already beginning to melt. We walked around Serenity, inspecting her carefully. A few new minor dents on the bodywork, like a golfer had taken a practice swing with a bag of marbles. The solar panel was intact, thank goodness. The vents were all still closed. The biggest issue seemed to be that one leaking window seal, which was still weeping a little. "Well," Karen said, managing a small smile. "She took a beating, but she's still standing. And so are we." "She's a tough old girl," I agreed, patting Serenity's flank again, this time with genuine affection and relief. "And you weren't so bad yourself, partner." "Neither were you," she replied, and squeezed my arm. In that simple gesture, there was a wealth of shared experience, of knowing we'd faced something significant together and come through it. It's in these moments, these unexpected crucibles, that a long-term relationship really shows its mettle. The little annoyances of daily life fade away, and the core connection, the unspoken understanding, comes to the fore. Back inside, the floor was indeed a Jackson Pollock of pasta shapes and a damp towel. "Operation Cleanup," Karen announced, already grabbing a dustpan. "Before cleanup," I said, "Operation Hot Beverage. I think we've earned it, tea. Strong, sweet tea. It's the universal British panacea, and even for an adopted enthusiast like me, it felt like exactly the right thing." As the kettle whistled, a wonderfully normal, comforting sound, we started to talk, really talk, about what had just happened. "I honestly thought, for a minute there, that the pop-top was going to rip off," Karen confessed. "The noise was terrifying." "Me too," I admitted. "I was envisioning us trying to hold a tarpaulin over a gaping hole in a hailstorm." "Wouldn't have been pretty," we both laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it now that the danger had passed. "You know," Karen said, cradling her mug of tea, "it's moments like these that make you appreciate the solidness of this van. We always joke about her little quirks, but when it really counted, she kept us safe." "She did," I agreed. "And it makes you appreciate having the right gear, and knowing how to use it. All those little checks, stowing things away properly, it all matters when things go sideways. It's a constant learning curve, this life. You can read all the books, watch all the videos, but some lessons are only learned through direct, and sometimes alarming, experience." Later, as the last of the storm clouds drifted away, a watery sun broke through, painting the ravaged landscape with streaks of gold. It was breathtakingly beautiful, in a wild, dramatic sort of way. The air smelled incredibly fresh and clean, tinged with the scent of wet earth and bruised pine needles. We ventured out again, the ground squelching under our boots. "Look," Karen said, pointing. A rainbow, impossibly vibrant, arched across the valley, its ends seeming to dip into the freshly green slopes. It felt like a peace offering from the sky. "Okay," I said, smiling. "Maybe the universe hasn't entirely forgotten us." We didn't make a campfire that evening, the ground was far too wet, and frankly, we were both a bit too wrung out for much more than a simple meal and an early night. But as we sat inside Serenity, warm and dry, listening to the gentle drip of water from the trees, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. "You know," I began, trying to put my thoughts into words, "people ask us why we do this. Why we gave up a comfortable house, a predictable routine, for days like today, sometimes." Karen nodded, looking out at the fading light. "And it's hard to explain, isn't it? Because it's not just about the perfect sunsets or the quiet forest clearings. It's about feeling alive. Truly alive." "Exactly," I said. "It's about facing challenges, even scary ones, and knowing you can handle them. Together. It's about stripping away all the non-essentials and finding out what really matters, and what really mattered, in that moment, was that we were safe, we were together, and our little home on wheels had weathered the storm. This life, after 50, it isn't about slowing down or winding down for us. It's about ramping up the experience dial. It's about choosing adventure, not because we're reckless, but because we understand that time is finite, and the world is vast and full of wonders, and yes, full of challenges too. And those challenges, as much as the easy, beautiful moments, are what shape us, what make the stories we'll tell. Today's story wasn't one we'd planned. We didn't set out to test Serenity to her limits or to give our nerves a thorough shredding. But it happened. And in the happening, we learned something more about our van, about the power of nature, and about ourselves. We learned that even when you're being tossed about like a toy, there's a strength you can find, a resilience you didn't know you possessed. It also reinforces the importance of being prepared, or as prepared as you can be. We had the towels, we knew to secure the hatches, we had our emergency tea supplies. Small things, perhaps, but in the moment, they make a difference. And it underscores the need for good communication and teamwork when things get hairy. There was no time for blame or panic, it was all about quick decisions and mutual support. I looked over at Karen. She was sketching in her little notebook, a habit she's developed on our travels, capturing a quick impression of the post-storm landscape. Her face was calm, reflective. The fear from earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She showed me. It was a simple sketch, but it perfectly captured the dramatic light, the flattened grass, and the incredible arc of the rainbow. "Storm's End," she'd titled it. "Perfect," I said. "That's exactly what it is. This journey isn't just about collecting destinations, it's about collecting experiences, about weaving a tapestry of memories that are rich and varied. Some threads are golden and bright, like that perfect morning. Others are darker, more turbulent, like the storm. But they all belong. They all contribute to the overall picture. And if you're living fully, you have to embrace all of it." We often say that our philosophy is about living 1 mile and 1 story at a time. Well, today, we didn't cover many miles, but boy, did we get a story. A story of wind and rain and hail, of fear and resilience, and ultimately, of the quiet joy of coming through something tough, together. Tomorrow? Well, tomorrow we'll probably spend some time airing things out, checking that window seal more thoroughly, maybe finding a local hardware store for some extra-strength sealant. And we'll definitely check the weather forecast with a newfound respect. But we'll also look for another trail, another view, another quiet spot to park serenity. Because the adventure doesn't stop just because you hit a bit of rough weather. In fact, sometimes, that's when it truly begins. It reminds you that freedom isn't free from difficulty. The open road offers incredible liberty, but it also demands adaptability, a willingness to confront the unexpected. Our old life was predictable, comfortable, and, if I'm honest, a little bit beige. This life is a full spectrum of color, sometimes dazzling, sometimes a bit stormy gray, but never, ever beige. And that's a trade we'd make again in a heartbeat. So, as the last light fades over this wonderfully battered but beautiful landscape, we're feeling tired but content. Serenity is a bit damp in places, a bit more dented, but she feels more like home than ever. And we, her slightly battered occupants, are reminded once again why we chose this path. It's not always easy, but it's always real. Thanks for joining us for this rather dramatic chapter of our van life after 50. We hope it perhaps gave you a little insight into the less glamorous, but equally important, side of this lifestyle. Maybe it even inspired you to think about your own storms and how you weather them. What's the most extreme weather you've ever been caught in, traveling or otherwise? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. We always learn so much from this wonderful community. Until next time, keep seeking those horizons, embrace the challenges as much as the joys, and remember to keep living fully, 1 mile, 1 story at a time. We'll see you down the road.